Welcome to the What in the Good Lord's Name is Going On edition of the NRL. Johnny, mate, before we even try and unravel the week that was, we'll start with the formalities. At least that'll give us a little bit of structure, a little bit of certainty before we head into the absolute chaos that was round 4. How are you, mate? How was your week?
Yeah, hello, listeners, and hello, Noz. Yeah, I'm good. Actually, really good. Both my teams won last start, which is always a bonus. Chooks and the Battle of the Birds. And Italy is still alive in World Cup qualifying. I'm not talking rugby league. I'm talking soccer. But anyway, back to our game. What a crazy week it's been, Noz. So much to unpack. I'm really keen to hear your take. No doubt it'll be delivered in classic Noz satire. So over to you, mate.
And I think the last 7 days will be beyond even my capacity for satire. It'd be like trying to satire a cyclone. Now, it's hard to believe, Johnny, we were sitting in these exact same spots to record episode 4. That was a week ago. It feels like it was recorded last September. I know the NRL has an infinite capacity to generate headlines, but it seems like we've just packed 6 months worth of storylines into a week. The first thing was Ben Teo storming out of his assistant coaching job in Brisbane. In the wake of our grapple last week, where we talked about Maguire's coaching at Brisbane, that didn't age particularly well, that segment. But then a couple of days later, that turned around and the Broncos came out on Friday night and put in an absolutely dominant performance against the Dolphins. Then we had Isaiah Ioane's breach notice. Mate, I love breach notices. We're going to be talking about them a little bit later in the freeballing section. And the apocalyptic weather in Sydney on Thursday night before the Manly Roosters game. We had photos going around our WhatsApp group and mate, Brookvale was almost underwater. I was half expecting a biblical plague of frogs across the halfway line. And mate, those frogs may have defended a little bit better than some of the Manly players. That wasn't even the biggest news of the week. On Friday, as we were sitting down and watching the Warriors-Tigers, just before half time, news started to filter out of Brookvale that Anthony Seibold had been sacked. So Seibold resold from the Seagulls, yet another big news story for a week that was generating a lot of them. And you'll notice, Johnny, that's before we even get to the football. No doubt you're going to be talking about your tipping, but there was upsets, there was big performances, there were just lots of things that happened on the field as well.
Biblical plague of frogs. Honestly, mate, how do you even come up with this stuff?
Yeah, mate, I'm not entirely sure my turn of phrase is helping with clarity at this point, but, mate, you know what can? Seagulls Roosters. There was a power outage in Brookvale a few hours before this game, perhaps cosmic retribution for the tripe these teams had dished out over the first few rounds. Luckily, the juice came back on before kickoff. Lucky for us as fans, we saw some incredible tries from Kula, Marky Mark and Toya. Lucky for the Chooks, they got back into the winner's circle after their recent lean run, and lucky for the Manly fans, they were able to vent their slightly tongue-in-cheek frustration at ex-favourite son DCE. Unfortunately, the luck ran out for Anthony Seibold. With the Seagulls' third straight home defeat to start the season, it was lights out for his coaching tenure at Manly. Warriors-Tigers. This game started like it was going to be a wash, with the Warriors running in 2 quick and soft tries. However, the Tigers woke up with a roar, piling on 22 unanswered points, with a flair befitting their considerable young talent. New Zealand may have given a glimmer of hope with a late try, but it was snuffed out with Jock Madden's game-sealing 4-pointer, one of 2 set up by a rampant Adam Dewey doing his best Reg Gasnier impersonation. Broncos-Dolphins. Of all of the Queensland clashes, the Broncos-Dolphins is the most like big brother, little brother. And if that's the case, then Mum would have been drying the tears of the younger sibling at the end of this. The score was close at the half, but that patented Brisbane kick saw the Broncos pull away in the second stanza, culminating in Katoni Staggs revisiting his famous Our House try and gesture. Despite all the noise, the Bronx are looking increasingly ominous. Bulldogs Knights. How about these Knights? No Ponga, no Brown, no worries. Let's just bash the Dogs in the forwards. As for the vaunted Canterbury defence, well, the castle walls looked decidedly brittle, springing leaks in the middle and on the edges, with Dom Young in particular running rampant with a 3-try haul. As much as we say defence wins games, putting points on the board is the way you actually win games. Maybe Cam Ciraldo should take advice from that renowned rugby league fan, Rene Descartes. I attack, therefore I am.
Let's move to Cowboys versus Storm. Another upset with the Cowboys storming back to knock over the Storm with 3 late tries. That's now back-to-back losses for Melbourne. And the worrying part, they were in control again and just couldn't ice it. I thought Bellamy summed it up perfectly in the presser when he said we blew it. Full credit to the Cows, though. Some seriously entertaining footy. That's 2 in a row now and probably takes a little bit of heat off Toddy Payton for the moment. Panthers versus the Eels. Once again, Penrith delivered a clinic, and Cleary, mate, simply sensational. He had the ball on the string, unloading every kick possible, leaving the Eels chasing shadows. Honestly, at this rate, I could copy-paste this review each week. On current form, the Panthers could go this season undefeated. Quite amazing. For the Eels, it was another tough day. To make matters worse, mate, the Eels have lost another player for the season with an ACL. And compounding that, the exciting fullback Iongi also went down. This next period is going to be a real test for Jason Riles and the Parramatta Eels. Moving to the Raiders versus the Sharks. Same story with the Raiders. Discipline, discipline, discipline. That early sin bin to Big Red handed the Sharks a dream start, where they scored 2 quick tries. From there, Canberra were always chasing the game, which, to be fair, they don't mind doing, but you just can't keep giving opposition teams a head start every week and expect to get away with it. Eventually, the luck's going to run out. Last year's minor premiers are now 1 win and 3 losses. But credit to the Sharks. Great bounce back after last week's heavy loss at home. Moving to the Titans versus Dragons. As I said in the last episode, one of these teams was going to get their first win of the season. I just had zero confidence picking who, to be honest. The Dragons, like every game so far this season, were right in the contest up until halftime, but their second halves continue to be a real concern. And right on cue, the Titans came charging back, led by this powerhouse in the back row, a relatively new fella, Arama Ho. Wow. Well done, Titans. You finally cracked your first win of the season. As for the Dragons, they're now winless, and the pressure is only going to rise on Coach Flanagan.
There it is, JC. Speed rounds. Maybe not as speedy as we want it. We still need to work on that, but we're getting there. We are getting there. Now, in terms of what caught our eye, I mentioned the fact that there was lots of really good football. But, mate, the one thing that really grabbed me this week were the West Tigers. I know I was skating of them last week in our recap of the round, but, mate, there is just something about this Wests team when they're on. For a start, they look much more competent with Madden in the team. It's unsurprising that you put a functioning halfback and your team structure improves. But, mate, the real star on Friday night was Adam Doueihi. He absolutely sliced the Warriors to pieces. For mine, it's crystal clear that he's not a half. Again, refer back to the game in Gosford. They just didn't have any direction with him playing number 7. But he is a traditional blockbusting inside centre. In the last 15-odd years, we've lost that old dynamic of the inside centre and the outside centre. But if you think back to some of the great centres of our game, Mick Cronin, Gene Miles, Mal Meninga, to me, Dewey's in a similar vein. He's got that ability to break the line. He moves really well in space as well. So he has that great capacity to position his support players. He's also got sneaky speed. He can get past a fullback himself. But with this West Tigers team and their amazing amount of young talent, the likes of Buller, Makasini, Turava, the new young winger who they unveiled on Friday night, Tavana, like whenever they make a break, whenever their tails are up, they absolutely swarm the ball. If there's a glimmer of opportunity, they often turn it into a fully fledged chance. So, mate, I really enjoyed watching the Tigers play against the Warriors on Friday night. Hope that it continues. What are your thoughts on it, mate?
Yeah, I agree. Great effort by the Tigers, and even tougher beating a hot Warriors side at home. As you said, I thought Doueihi was brilliant with his running game. Probably his best ever game for the Tigers, to be honest. He nailed some big plays. And as you said, he had some great support from Madden at 5'8". And those young kids all stepped up. I'm a massive fan of their fullback, Buller. So I really hope the Tigers can build something this year, string some consistent wins back to back, because they've really got some unbelievable excitement machines in that squad, combined with some experienced heads to guide them around the park. I feel it's up for Benji Ball this season.
Yeah, mate, my take on Benji Ball, I think I sledged it. That take has aged relatively poorly as well. But onwards and upwards, Johnny, mate, we're always about the next big thing. Now, in terms of the next big thing, mate, we're actually changing this week's grapple up. And not just with our Schmicko new jingle and title card. Now, what title card I hear you say? This one? But that is not the end of the innovation, Johnny, not by a long stretch. Today, we're going to move away from our old man renting format. We're going to go to more of a Q&A. I'm also not going to lie here, Johnny. We did to start to work this section up before last Friday night. We then had to pivot when news came through of Anthony Seibold's sacking. Our question was going to be, which coach is going to be the first to lose his job? So that was answered about 6:45 on Friday night. Before we actually do go into our hastily reconfigured question, Johnny, what are your thoughts on Seibold's sacking?
Look, blind Freddie knew Seibold was under pressure, especially after 3 losses and all at Brookie. But I'm just surprised they pulled the trigger so early. In my view, he really didn't get a chance to prove himself. Usually, you give a coach maybe half a season, but you could see from owner Mr. Sean Penn, or Scott Penn, I should say, in the presser, they were expecting success much faster. It didn't happen, and obviously he got brutally boned. Foran now steps in as the interim coach for the remainder of the season, and it's actually got a little bit of Freddie Fittler vibes about it. You remember years ago when he had to step in for the Roosters after I think they sacked Chris Anderson. So, mate, I wish Kieran all the best. He's a great fella. Obviously, got a great respect from his peers, and hopefully he does a great job.
I actually like the idea of Sean Penn coaching the Manly Seagulls. The knock against Seibold there was that he wasn't really a rousing figure in the dressing sheds. I bet you Sean Penn would improve the quality of the halftime rants. Now, mate, actually, I've made this comment a few times. Any team where the coach gets sacked mid-season, they always get a bit of a bounce. I think Manly will get a bounce. I think they'll be better for the next few weeks. But, mate, let's get real. When you sack a coach, it's punting on the season. That's why it's so surprising that Manly went early. But I think they just looked at where they were going as a club and they thought, well, this isn't going to improve. I think that was a pretty appropriate take. You mentioned Kieran Foran. He's been put in because of his stature. I mean, he's a man that commands a lot of respect in the game. I think he'll be able to get his players back in. One of the things that was blatantly obvious was that Seibold had lost the dressing sheds. Kieran Foran will be able to get all those Manly players' heads back in the game. But I also think it's a hospital pass. He hasn't got any real coaching experience. He's basically had a preseason and the first 4 rounds of the competition. It's a very, very tough ask for a bloke with no coaching experience, particularly with a team that's playing so poorly at the moment. Okay, now on to our hastily reconvened question. Mate, what other coaches are on the hot seat? Now, as part of this, Johnny, I want you to play both sides. I want you to tell me why they're going to lose their jobs, and then I want you to tell me why they should keep their jobs.
Okay, I had 3 coaches in the hot seat, but obviously we're already 1 down as Manly beat me to it with the Seibold being resold. So I've locked in 2. I'm still workshopping the 3rd. No, I've got the 3rd. Don't worry. So first up, Toddy Payton at the Cows. Why could he lose his job? Look, it's all because of Cow's inconsistency. You generally never know what team is turning up. One week they look like world beaters, and we saw that when they played Melbourne on the weekend. The next, they look like bottom feeders. Why keep him? I actually don't mind him. He fronts the media well, win, lose or draw. He's very honest, probably sometimes too honest, but obviously being good in the post-match ain't going to keep your job. Second, I've got Shane Flanagan at the Dragons. Even with his recent contract extension, I've still got him in the conversation, which may sound harsh, but I reckon there's support from a few Dragon fans. Why could he go? The halves. It's as simple as that. It's been their Achilles heel since he arrived. They still haven't nailed it. Kyle, his son, is just not an NRL number 6, and I think change is needed. And Coach Flanagan has really struggled to land genuine marquee talent, excluding some aging names. Why keep him? Look, he's got that hard edge, doesn't take any rubbish, and some clubs need that, especially ones like the Dragons. So let's see how he goes for the remainder of the season. And third, I've got Laurie Daly, our mate, the Blues coach. Why could he go? Look, he's too safe. He's very loyal, doesn't always pull the trigger on the big selection calls when it matters. Why keep him? Look, Loz, as we all know, he's a great bloke, well respected. In my opinion, he's one of the best Blues players ever. If I'm Loz, I'd be seeking out Ricky Stewart to be in his corner as an advisor or something.
But I think you missed one, and that's your mate Trent Robinson. It might sound a little bit harsh. It might verge on the ridiculous because Robbo has a record which is historically great. 3 premierships in 13 years, 4 minor premierships, World Club Championships. This is probably the most remarkable stat about his coaching at the Roosters. They've only missed the semis once over the 13 years that he's been there. But, mate, the fact is that Robbo's real coaching peers, Ivan Cleary, Craig Bellamy, mate, they're out coaching him at the moment, and they have been for a while now. So the Chooks are a team that has enough talent to be competitive, but they haven't got enough coaching structure to be elite. I think the seat's actually warming up under Robbo as well. If he does stay there, I think the next half decade is going to be a real test of his coaching, and it also could determine his legacy, at least his latter legacy. These Roosters are increasingly caught in the middle. I mean, are they a win now team? Are they a team in decline? Are they a team on the rise? You could make the argument that they're all three, and you could make an equally compelling argument that they're none. So I think Robbo needs to work out the direction quickly. He also needs to desperately put some coaching structure around Sam Walker. I mean, Walker has the potential to be our game's next playmaking superstar. At the moment, he's floundering. He's really inconsistent from week to week. If they don't unlock Sam Walker, if they don't work out a direction, but I think the Roosters are going to continue to make up the numbers.
Yeah, look, putting my Roosters hat to one side, I don't think Robbo's really under pressure at the Roosters, but I do agree he's under pressure to be considered in those elite coaching ranks because of his record against the big two, as you mentioned. Funny thing is, when the Chooks were winning comps the last Tara back in 18 and 19, they didn't really have any bogey teams. I reckon they're due to make a GF soon. 7 years is a long time in Uncle Nick's eyes, especially after all of our success since 2000. And I agree, the Roosters' success needs to be built around Sammy Walker. I'm just not seeing it yet with DCE, so come on, Robbo.
But I think that the Roosters are closer to Robbo being sacked than they are to a grand final. I'm sorry to say that, but there's nothing they've shown over the first month of the competition that says that they're on track for a grand final, mate. Okay, now onto the round preview. Dolphins versus Seagulls. Let's go, Johnny.
Okay, first game for Foz as head coach of the Eagles, playing Redcliffe, as you call them, Noz, up in Redcliffe. Both teams can leak points, leak tries, so it's even on the defensive side. But it's clear the Dolphins have an attacking edge big time, especially with their big guns, Hammer, Herbie, Katoa and co. Again, Dolphins should win, but I've made that comment before, and how many times have we seen it where a coach is sacked in any sport for that matter, and next game, after a period of losses, they come out and win.
But I think there will be a bounce. I think Manly will improve from their early season form. I mean, the players are now on notice as well. That's the one thing about sacking a coach is the message well and truly gets through to the players. I think both of these sides have improved. So Redcliffe were a bit better in defence last week. I mean, their attack's never a problem, but their defence was much more stout. The game just got away from them last week. That can happen when you play Brisbane. The Seagulls' performance, it did improve, but again, they had too many lapses. There was that 5-minute section where the Roosters ran in 3 tries, and that was basically the difference in the game. But I think the Finns will get the win. I do think it's going to be a tight encounter, though. And come on, Manly, get the ball to Cooler. Get the ball to him. He's an absolute excitement machine.
Rabbitohs versus Bulldogs. The Good Friday special. Easter Bunnies versus the Dogs. Look, last year was an absolute whitewash. The Doggies won 32-0. However, the Dogs are coming off a loss to the Knights. Their attack still looks clunky, not settled. It's like they're trying to build something, but the instructions are in a different language. Now, Souths are coming off the bye, so they should be fresh. If all their troops are back on deck, this should be a lot tighter than last year. I'm actually leaning Bunnies, but I'm not exactly betting my chocolate stash on it.
This one's going to be a very, very tough one to pick. And it just depends on which version of these teams turns up. Will we get the tough, resilient Dogs, the team that eked out a really strong victory against Canberra a few weeks ago, or are we going to get the cream puffs who ran around against the Knights? Souths, I mean, they're similar. Against the Dolphins, they showed a whole heap of flair. And then the following week, they were half asleep. They barely got over the Tigers. So I think both teams will show up, and that means it'll be a nice clash of contrasts between a defensive-minded Dogs team and a Souths team that has some attack in them. I'm actually going to go opposite you though, Johnny. I think the Dogs in this one. I think they're really going to be smarting after last week's loss against the Knights, and I think they're going to show a whole heap of resolve, and it's going to be too much for Souths.
Dragons versus Cowboys. It's Flanagan. who's really in the hot seat now. I read a scary stat yesterday. The Dragons ended season 25 with 4 straight losses, and they've started season 26 the same way. So it's actually 8 losses in a row. That's a worrying stat. As for the Cows, the big question is, as I said earlier, which side's going to turn up, especially down in Sydney. Right now, I'm actually leaning towards the Cowboys.
I, for the life of me, can't work out why the Dragons gave Shane Flanagan an extension. First and foremost, who are they bidding against? I mean, it's not as though the Dallas Cowboys or Real Madrid are going to swoop in and get Shane as their manager or their coach. Made no sense. And mate, this is a Dragons team that just, I mean, what are they? They have no real identity. This is going to sound really harsh. I think that Shane Flanagan has a real problem with integrity, and that's the foundation stone on which you build a club. Toddy Payton, on the other hand, I think he's turned this Cowboys team around nicely in the last fortnight. Bit of a blip against the Tigers, but they can put points on quality teams. I don't think the Dragons have been as bad as 0-4 would suggest. They actually have the 4th worst differential, but mate, they can't put points on the board. And if you can't put points on the board against the Cowboys, you're really going to struggle. I'm actually leaning towards the Cowboys in this one.
Titans versus the Broncos. The Broncos were outstanding against the Dolphins last week, especially after all the drama coming out of Red Hill. I thought Adam Reynolds led them beautifully, just steering the ship. And then you've got the freak show around him, Reece Walsh doing Reece Walsh things, Katoni, Mam, etc. I'm thinking this one's going to be close. Well, actually, I want this to be close, but my head is telling me that this could get ugly. I think it's Broncos by plenty.
Yeah, maybe, mate. This game has trap game written all over it. The Broncos are riding high off a couple of good wins. The Madge tension is still bubbling under the surface. It's also at a local derby, and we've talked about local derby rules. Mate, that said, I am moron would pick against the Broncos considering their current form. But guess what? Mate, said moron in the house. I've made a little bit of a vow this week with my tipping to be a bit more swashbuckling. I just have a feeling in my bones with this one, Johnny. That may explain why I'm such a terrible tipper. I go with my bones rather than all of the evidence. Remember the Titans? Or maybe don't if the Broncos put 40 on them. We'll see.
Sharks versus the Warriors. Look, the Sharks played well against the undisciplined Raiders last week. Really liked how their halves combined. You'd think home advantage gives the Sharks the edge, but stranger things have happened. Remember their clash with the Dolphins a few weeks back. The Warriors had a surprise loss at home last start, but I reckon they can bounce back, even playing in Oz. On paper, this Warriors squad looks really strong, and I'm especially looking forward to the Fisher-Harris versus AFB showdown. Should be a beauty.
God. Mate, this one's at Ocean Protect Stadium, but it could well be a case of sanity protect for us tippers. The Sharks, they were good against the Raiders, but given us 2 weeks of rubbish before that. The Warriors, after their really strong start, had no answers for a rampant Tigers team at home in Auckland. Mate, I'm leaning towards the Sharks, but that's just based on home ground. I think this will be a close and entertaining clash. Anything could happen here. I've got no confidence in this tip whatsoever.
Knights versus Raiders. Not sure if the listeners know this, but outside the Roosters, I've got a soft spot for the Knights. They're actually my second favourite team. Goes all the way back to the Joey Johns days. And I'll tell you what, they've been seriously impressive this year. 3 wins on the board, and they've done most of it without about $2.6 million sitting in the casualty ward with Dylan Brown and Kalen Ponga missing. That's quite unbelievable. This young Knights side, mixed with a few old hard heads, is playing some really nice footy. That first half against the Dogs last week, they absolutely blew them off the park. Dom Young, wow. He looks a hell of a lot faster this year. Now the Raiders, I reckon they're the NRL's unofficial X Factory. So much young, exciting talent with Weeks, Strange, Savage. But it's been their discipline that's been killing them. It should be a cracking game up in Newcastle. The crowd will be up for this one, no doubt frothing on 1,000 beers. I'm tipping the Knights.
You mentioned X Factor. I actually think X Factor is currently Z Factor for these Raiders. They have one win, which was their last gasp victory against Manly. I think Manly's subsequent form has shown that that's not particularly impressive. They've been off the pace. I think they've been ill-disciplined. They've also been pretty miserable to watch at times. The Knights, on the other hand, they've been everything the Raiders haven't. They've been spirited. They've been creative. They've also been winning. I'm going to go the Knights for this one. Knights have been a joy to watch, and the Raiders have been anything but.
Your Eels versus the Tigers. Look, this is a true litmus test for the Tigers. They're coming off a great win, plenty of energy, plenty of confidence. But now we find out if it's real or just a 1 week sugar hit. On form, you're probably leaning Tigers, but Para always seem to have their number. For the Eels, it's the usual story. It all runs through Mitch Moses. If he's on, they're on. But they are missing some troops, and a few of those injuries are season-ending kinds, so not ideal. The Tigers, though, if they bring that same attitude from the Warriors game, that energy and that willingness to attack, I reckon they can win this one and actually win it well. But again, this is the test. Anyone can get up for one game. Can they go back to back? That's really been the missing piece for the Tigers over the last decade.
Yeah, run through seems to be the dominant theme with this year's Eels, particularly with Moses and Pezzet's Swiss cheese defence on the edges. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the Dragons and their fourth worst differential. They Para have the worst differential. They are awful in defence. And if we're being honest, they're closer to the wooden spoon than they are the semis on their current form. They do need to tighten up, or the Tigers could put a score on them. Other than the glitch against South, their attack's been fantastic. I think the Tigers are going to win this easily. Parramatta will be sitting there on Tuesday morning having to do some real self-searching. Now, onto the game of the round, Johnny. Again, this one was pretty obvious. It was as obvious as the Titans and the Dragons last week. Mate, the Panthers versus the Storm.
All right, on paper, this should be an absolute blockbuster. The two benchmark teams going at it. But if you're going off recent form, there's a bit of daylight between them right now. Penrith are playing a brand of footy on another planet. It's like they've unlocked a cheat code. Meanwhile, the Storm have developed this quirky habit of dominating games and then just clocking off early. It's like they've got dinner reservations at halftime. Newsflash, it's an 80-minute game, lads, so make sure you're playing for the 80 this week. But still, there are some cracking matchups up here, none bigger than Cleary versus Hughes. That's worth the price of admission alone. Hard to go past Penrith. They're just too clinical and composed. If Melbourne are any chance, it'll be off the back of Harry Grant. He's a rare breed at hooker and in red-hot form. Basically, their best hope of dragging them back into the full 80-minute reality.
It wouldn't awesome Friday night game, maybe. I mean, there's been a few pretty mouthwatering clashes that have featured Penrith over the last month of football, and they've turned them all into whitewashes. In saying that, though, if there's anybody that can conjure up a game plan to beat this Penrith team, it's the NRL's reigning master of the dark arts, Craig Bellamy. Somehow, you need to knock Penrith off their rhythm. Now, that's no easy task, but maybe the Storm can do it. Tall order at the moment. You mentioned the fact that the Storm have lacked application over the whole 80 minutes. Again, only an imbecile would tip against the current form of the Panthers, and mate, even my imbecility doesn't stretch that far. I think Penrith. All right, Johnny, now that the round preview is over, it's time for freeballing. Now, last week you did a great one on the jumper sponsors through the history of rugby league. Mate, this week I'm going to be on a historical bent as well. I mentioned earlier that Isaiah Iongi from the Eels was issued with a breach notice for social media pictures. So during the week, there were pictures from a couple of years ago that surfaced of him smoking an undisclosed green substance. Undisclosed. What do you think it could have been, mate?
Matcha, green tea.
Could have. I don't think we're ever going to know. I mean, I suspect over time this is going to become as big a mystery as the Loch Ness monster. But in terms of breach notices, mate, for some reason, maybe it's linked to the history of our sport, which was forged in inner city Sydney with all of its SP bookies and its dodgy wharfies and its razor gangs. But mate, rugby league has always looked for ways to bend the rules, be it on the field or off the field. And in that way, breach notices, the very thing that was issued to Iongi this week, they almost form an alternate history of the NRL. It's like they provide a glimpse into the game's colourful underbelly. And the best part of it is it's all couched in the most oblique, bureaucratic language that almost requires a literary professor to demystify. Now, first of all, what is a breach notice? Pretty much as they sound, when a club, a player, a coach, a trainer does something wrong, the NRL gives them a breach notice, which basically details what they've done and the punishment, also giving them an opportunity to provide their point of view. Now, these tend to fall into three categories. We've got the organisational ones. So that's where the club does something wrong. We've got the operational ones. Now, these are the ones that often make you shake your head, like trainers putting sticky substances on balls before the other team kicks off. And finally, you have everyone's favourite, and that's the integrity and the code of conduct ones. Now, they're really masterpieces of bureaucratic obfuscation and comedy. We'll get to those. But if we go back to the alternate history part, in the 21st century, the breach notices provide a perfect potted history of our game. It breaks into three distinct eras. The first of those eras was the salary cap scandal era of the early 2000s. As the game became more and more big business, clubs were trying to get an edge both on and off the field. Salary cap scandals became a big thing. We had the '02 Bulldogs. We had the 2010 Storm being stripped of their competition points. As always, Parramatta were 10 years behind. We got fined for major cap breaches in 2016. Mate, the only thing they could find to strip us of was the Auckland Nines, which was a little bit depressing. But that was the first era. Mate, the second era was the 2010s. As the game became more and more professional and demanding and cutthroat, we entered into the performance-enhancing drugs era. That was headlined by Shane Flanagan and the Cronulla Sharks, the peptide controversy. And we also had a couple of high-profile individual cases, Shendor Earl, Bronson Jerry. A ridiculous subset of this one was the trainer shenanigans that culminated in the Penrith trainer running in front of Jaden Campbell before he attempted a conversion. That was fantastic. I wonder if he muttered lollies as he was running past him as well. Then the third one, as players made more and more money and had more and more time on their hands, we entered into the 2020s and the undisclosed substances era. We had the Munster, Smith and Lewis incident where they were partying in a hotel room with a white powder. Latrell Mitchell in Dubbo with more of that pesky undisclosed white substance, and Iongi smoking Phuket Chinese tea in the bath. So, mate, those ones always garner a lot of headlines. But the best part of breach notices, Johnny, is the language. The language is a thing of wonder. You can probably remember back to the early 80s where Gentleman Jim Comins, the head of the judiciary, was trying to clean up the game, striding across rugby league like he was Wyatt Earp, taking out the likes of Bob Cooper and Les Boyd and Mark Bugden. Mate, I'm sure that Gentleman Jim would be absolutely mystified at breach notices with language like this. You ready? The presence of a prohibited substance and or its metabolites or markers in a player's sample and use and or attempted use by a player of a prohibited substance or a prohibited method. Now, mate, that literally needs a chemistry professor to interpret. Or how about the club is aware of an alleged incident involving a player and an illicit substance. The matter has been referred to the NRL Integrity Unit and is currently under investigation. That's basically code for how long do you think this is going to be in the news? Can we somehow manage to avoid any repercussions from this? And mate, the best part about breach notices is we're probably going to get about another 6 before the end of the season. So it gives us something to look forward to as well as the action on the field. Okay, Johnny, mate, that is another episode of NRL Offside done and dusted. Mate, part of me actually hopes that everything calms down this week so we can take a breath. The other part actually hopes that it all keeps up because it makes our job pretty easy to come up with things to talk about. Knowing the NRL and its capacity to get in the news, I strongly suspect it's going to be the latter. Mate, have a great Easter weekend. Enjoy your footy. Lead us out.
Yeah, happy Easter to you, Noz, and all our listeners as well. Enjoy the long weekend of Easter footy. And if form's anything to go by, every team that lost last start is due for a win. Take care, everyone.